And we begin with this. From threats of ending civilization in Iran to a ceasefire, President Trump announced the U.S. and Iran have agreed to a 2-week pause as long as Iran reopens the crucial Strait of Hormuz. The president added that the U.S. is weighing a 10-point proposal from Iran and believes it's a workable basis to negotiate peace. So here are the key points of Iran's reported proposal: a withdrawal of U.S. forces in the region, full compensation for Iran, lifting of all sanctions, Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, and an end to hostilities against Iran and its proxies. Here's what Vice President Vance said today about the ceasefire.
If the Iranians are willing, in good faith, to work with us, I think we can make an agreement. If they're going to lie, if they're going to cheat, if they're going to try to prevent even the fragile truce that we've set up from taking place, then they're not going to be happy.
Meanwhile, at the Pentagon today, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said U.S. forces achieved every objective in Iran, decimating the country's military.
Iran begged for this ceasefire, and we all know it. As the President truth this morning, a big day for world peace. Iran wants it to happen. They've had enough.
And we are waiting for White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt to hold a press briefing on where things stand with Iran. She's expected to take to that podium there shortly. In the meantime, let's go live to the White House and CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand. Natalie, can you take us through how we got from President Trump's threats of ending civilization to a ceasefire agreement?
Yeah, Mugo, it was just about an hour and a half before the president's deadline when he announced on Truth Social that he agreed to this ceasefire that was proposed last evening by Pakistan. We know a key part of that was a commitment by Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump calling this a two-sided ceasefire. But now the really hard part begins. These 2 weeks of talks to try to turn this from ceasefire to a lasting peace, something you heard Vice President J.D. Vance talking about in that clip speaking from Hungary. He has called this a fragile truce. And we know that Pakistan has invited both the U.S. and Iran to Islamabad on Friday to start this more difficult process. We're still waiting to find out who exactly from the administration will attend. Earlier, President Trump told the New York Post that it would likely be his special envoy, Steve Witkoff, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and possibly the vice president, though he said there's a question of safety and security. So we will be waiting for updates on this front during that press briefing that you just referenced.
And Natalie, is there right now any indication from the White House about its next moves in this war? Basically, what is President Trump looking for as an off-ramp from the war?
Yeah, well, the morning after, both the Trump administration and Iran are claiming victory here in this ceasefire. But the big question that we're kind of all watching for is what happens to Iran's enriched uranium. And the president actually referenced that in a Truth Social earlier today, saying that the U.S. working with Iran will essentially dig up what he called nuclear dust. Of course, this was a stated goal of the administration of this operation to make sure that Iran could not have a nuclear weapon. But we know that talks broke down between the Trump administration and Iran when Steve Witkoff said Iran continued to claim it had a right to enrich uranium. So while it's interesting to note, this ceasefire proposal that you detailed in the setup did not specifically address the issue of uranium, but that is without question going to be a key part of these upcoming talks.
And we know President Trump, he is set to meet later today with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. It comes amid his harsh criticism of NATO since this war started. What can we expect today with that meeting?
Yeah, and we learned of this meeting last week, well ahead of the announcement of this ceasefire, kind of at the height of when President Trump was criticizing NATO and NATO members for, he said, not doing enough to secure the Strait of Hormuz during this conflict, arguing that Europe and other countries rely much more on the strait for oil. Well, European leaders, as we heard and we've talked about, they said that this was not their war and that they were not going to get involved until the fighting ended. We know that the UK, leading a coalition of allies, has been working on some plans for, when the combat concluded and they could go in there and help to kind of secure the strait. We will be waiting to see if this meeting between President Trump and the NATO Secretary General, if it opens up to the press pool, we'll be listening for any additional details, and also to try to see if the tensions have kind of dialed down between the president and NATO. He has a friendly relationship with the Secretary General, Mark Rutte, but remember, it was just last week when he was telling some outlets that he was considering or threatening withdrawing from the key military alliance, something that he cannot do unilaterally. That would require congressional approval, Nuko.
Okay, Natalie Brand at the White House. Thank you so much. And now let's bring in CBS News senior foreign correspondent MTS Tayeb in Doha, Qatar. MTS, how is Iran responding to the ceasefire agreement?
Muga, I think it's not going great. We only have to look at those scenes in Beirut. I think we have some of that video of that Israeli strike in which we understand around there's 300 or so casualties. And it really just underscores just how tense this situation is. We heard Natalie talking about that 10-point plan. Part of that plan, from the Iranian perspective at least, is that all violence would halt, including in Lebanon, where Israel has been carrying out punishing strikes for several weeks now as it continues to target the Iranian proxy Hezbollah. Again, we see this pretty harrowing video of this major strike inside of the heart of Beirut, a city of over 2 million people. And Iran has responded by saying that, listen, if Israel's going to continue to target Lebanon, which is not part of this agreement, we are not going to let ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz. For President Trump, that is crucial to any kind of agreement. And so for ships not to be moving through that very narrow waterway in which 20% of the world's energy passes through, I think this very fragile ceasefire has become that much more fragile. We understand around 2 ships have passed through, but Iran very clearly expressing their anger. Now, what we don't know is what kind of back channel is going on between the U.S. And Israel. I would imagine that the U.S. leadership is not very happy with the fact that strikes are going on in Lebanon, but more importantly, it really just throws into question just how durable this ceasefire is. Remember, it's only 2 weeks long. It negotiated by Pakistan. Of course, many countries here in the Gulf are hoping that it can lead to some sort of durable deal, but right now it's looking pretty shaky.
Yeah, not starting off very well. So MTS, all of that considered, what hurdles are negotiators facing when it comes to actually reaching a peace deal?
We have to consider 2 things here. We talked about the fact that Iran has presented this 10-point plan. We also have a 15-point plan from President Trump or the Trump administration. Marrying those 2 plans is going to be incredibly difficult. We have to be very clear. Both of those plans present the most maximalist position from both Iran and the U.S. And in saying that, President Trump has acknowledged in some of his Truth Social posts that there is some overlap there, that he does believe there is a path forward between these 2 countries. But as we've been seeing in Lebanon, the real spoiler here potentially could be Israel. We have to remember, this isn't just a war between the U.S. and Iran. It is a war between Iran, the U.S., and Israel. Israel has a say in all of this. And I think the question really remains is whether or not the U.S. can either contain Israel or agrees with them and says, you're right, we need to have this fighting continue. But it's very clear that President Trump, and indeed, if we hear those statements from Vice President J.D. Vance, that they want to try to find some sort of negotiated path forward. Many believe that in the next few days, we could see J.D. Vance and indeed other U.S. envoys in the Pakistani capital envoy. Pakistan, of course, playing an outsized role in these negotiations. It's seen as this neutral country in which it has close ties with the U.S., but also close ties with Iran. They are hoping that this ceasefire can hold and that they can negotiate some sort of path forward, which will see an end to this 6-week war, which has not only caused so much damage in Iran, that has really damaged countries right across the Gulf, including here in Qatar, where I am tonight. Back to you.
All right, MTS Tayyip, thank you so much for your time today and for your reporting.